Minimalists.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Minimalist Podcast, where we discuss what it means to live a meaningful life with less. My name is Joshua Fields Milburn.
And I am Ryan Nicodemus, and together we are the Minimalists.
Welcome to episode 150. Today we're going to talk about location and how the place or the city or the town in which you live affects the rest of your life. And it's one of those things that's often overlooked, or it's overlooked, meaning it's... either there's often not enough emphasis placed on it, or there's too much emphasis placed on it for me. I think about growing up in Dayton, Ohio, and now, like, looking back at it, it's one of my favorite cities. We go back 2 or 3 times a year and spend time there, and there's like a crazy sort of positive nostalgia for me, but also like there's a familiarity. But there was also a time when I wanted to leave Dayton and placed a whole lot of emphasis on, well, I'll just go. I remember I was looking for jobs back in, this was my mid-20s. My boss was actually, I had an interview with a separate telecom company, and they were hiring, I was a regional manager at the time, and they were hiring regional managers for different places, and I was looking at like, maybe I'll go to, Providence, Rhode Island, or maybe San Francisco.
You're just like looking to get out somewhere.
Yeah, running away from something as opposed to running to something.
Yeah.
And I think that'll be a common theme, because it's also important to figure out what place is right for me based on my activities, my preferences right now. And that changes over time too. And we could talk about, we've lived in a few different places, even though we're in Los Angeles now. We've tried out different places, and we've considered moving different places. Before we get into that, though, I just wanted to say that they just announced the new iPhone that came out, right? Or that's coming out.
Are you going to get it? Did you pre-order it?
It's the iPhone XS.
Do you think they did that on purpose?
I don't know.
Like, are they?
I realize a million people have made the joke already, but come on, XS.
Oh my goodness, man, that's hilarious. Yeah, that's funny, man.
And then there's
I still have a 5.
Well, there's the iPhone XS Max, which is even so. I guess they had 3 different new models that are coming out. There's an XR, which I have no idea what that means, but then they're calling them 10, like 10R, and then 10S. But really, it's the XS, and then the XS Max, which is exactly where we are in our culture with consumption.
Man, what a... Yeah. I'm just wondering if they had to have known when they were like, yeah, we're going to call this XS. And the XS Max, like, they had to see the irony in it.
Right.
I mean, much like, us being the minimalists, there's a lot of irony in things that we do.
Right.
Like, we see it.
Sure.
But yeah, I don't know, man. maybe they didn't see it. So we just got back from Sao Paulo.
Yeah, I've got that on our list of things to talk about during right here, right now.
Oh, okay.
If we can get to these questions first.
All right, let's go ahead and get to the questions.
Who's our first question from, Ryan?
It's Sarah from Brooklyn.
Well, teaching is very much aligned with my life's mission. I find that a lot of my downtime is spent sort of recovering and resting. And I feel quite depleted at the end of the week. I'm wondering if you can speak to location, and because I'm thinking, like, I feel that maybe New York City is not the right place for me. How did you decide on Montana and LA? My other question is, I find that I keep simplifying more and more. And I wonder, does it become clear when you finally reached enough, or at some point do you just say, this is good? Because I find that as I keep going deeper on this journey, I keep realizing, I actually need less stuff. And it just feels like maybe I've become a little bit obsessed, and my time is spent too much sort of finding new places to simplify.
So, Ryan, she's a middle school teacher, and she talks about how that aligns with her life's mission. I think that differentiation, the word she used, whether it's intentional or not, she said it aligns with her life's mission, but she didn't say it was her life's mission. And I think that's a good... she's recognizing something, that she has a life's mission. Maybe that's to contribute, maybe that's to help kids, But there are different ways to do that, and maybe, just maybe, it has nothing to do with the location that she's in. She's in New York City, but she's also, it sounds to me like an introvert, like I am. I think it's perfectly okay. It's fine to be an introvert in the city, although
I find a lot of introverts prefer to be in crowded cities.
Yeah.
I wonder, like for you, who is high introvert, what is it about a tightly packed city that makes you feel like you can still be introverted? But
right.
Yeah.
Well,
why is it appealing, I guess?
It's appealing to me because, well, it's what I call ambient people, having access to people and so the ability to connect. Although there's another type of introvert, and they tend to be older men living in Montana or Alaska, where like literally they'll live by themselves and not see people for weeks at a time.
They wouldn't. Yeah, they would never live in LA or New York or
right. Exactly, and they don't even want the potential for interaction. In fact, that's what sort of turns them away from cities. Is they don't want that potential. They don't want to be bothered. And while I don't necessarily want to be bothered either, I think I have the right to be left alone. I want the ability to be able to connect with other people if need be. And that's been one of the great things about living in Los Angeles for me is we have met so many new people where I have access to them. I don't have to see them every single day, but if I have a friend who I have coffee with once a quarter, then that's great. I have that access.
A lot of people come through here too, which is really cool.
Yeah. That's a great point, because you're living somewhere where you have access to other people when they come through here. Not a lot of people were coming through Missoula, Montana when we lived there.
Yeah.
I mean, occasionally, and then of course we would like spend time with them, but
it's so weird. I would always offer people to come out to Missoula, Montana, which for me, like, that's like, if I was given the option to go to Montana and had a place to stay in the mountains, like, I would do everything I could to get out there, because I mean, it is just like that's my paradise,
Yeah.
Not many people took me up on that offer,
right?
But when I threw out that offer in LA, dude, it's funny because like within the first 2 or 3 months, I had to like scale it back and be like, oh, like everyone's now taking me up on this offer to stay at my place.
Yeah, I'm rescinding the offer,
right?
Retroactively.
But I think a lot of it has to do with like people do just. I mean, LA is a hub, so people come here often. Missoula is a destination. It's not really a hub of sorts.
Yeah, and in California, but Southern California and LA especially. I mean, it's a world city, right? And so there's something like 12 million people in the county, 20 million people in the metro area. So you can also find people who align with what your preferences and hobbies and everything. I mean, you've met friends who you go surfing with now. I don't have those same friends because I don't go surfing. It's not that I have any judgment against that person, but like it's in fact a good friend of mine, Andre. Andre, he went to a comedy store with us a few weeks ago. He's like, hey, do you and Bex want to go out with me and my girl for, like a board game night? And I'm like, no, of course I don't want to.
Like, how miserable.
Right. But it's also being honest about what my preferences are. And that's, I think, where we are with Sarah right now, is she's starting to be honest with herself about what her preferences are. I remember being in the corporate world, to make this analogous to what to her professional career. When I was in the corporate world, I had to be an extrovert almost all day, right? Managing people, leading teams of people, interacting with customers, no matter what my role was, even when I was just a sort of frontline salesman in a retail store, all the way up to being a director of a bunch of retail stores. I had to interact with people 24 hours a day. Now, part of that aligned with the person I wanted to be, because I did want to lead people. I wanted to help people. I wanted to add value to people's lives. And maybe 20% of what I was doing allowed me to do that. But the other 80% did not actually align with the person I wanted to become. And I think that's where maybe Sarah is right now. I don't know that it's the city. It could be the city. And the only way you'll know is to try out a different city. It doesn't mean you have to do it for a long period of time. I just had our friend Nate Green is moving. I mean, we did that breakup podcast with him, 148. And now he's been living in Montana for a while, and they're in Portland. And he's like trying to figure out like what's his next step. And so he and I did a living room conversation together on YouTube. Shout out to YouTube audience. Hey y'all. When we were on living room conversations, he's testing something out for the next year. He's moving to. He's moving somewhere overseas in Asia, and then after.
Wait, he's going to Thailand, right?
Yeah, but a specific part where there's a He's doing some sort of meditation, and it's close to a particular
I gotta get
community.
Out there and see him, man.
And then I think he's probably going to go to Croatia for 6 months after that.
Croatia.
And then after that, he's not really sure where he's going to be. And I think that's the nice thing. So Sarah asked, how did you choose Montana? How did you choose Los Angeles?
Yeah, it's funny, man. When we went on that tour, our very first tour was 2011.
Yeah,
like the end of the year, and we did basically 75, the highway 75. We went down to Florida, and then we Tennessee, stuff that you and I have seen a million times.
Yeah.
But then we started to branch out and go to like Chicago or Phoenix or Portland or LA, and I just remember having that feeling that you were talking about earlier before we got into these questions about how you just want to run from Dayton, Ohio, because, well, I think when you're raised somewhere, everything gets a little bit, I don't want to say boring, but you want a change of scenery.
Yeah.
And Dayton, Ohio, it is a beautiful place, don't get me wrong. But yeah, I was like, all right, no more cornfields, no more allergies. I want to like get out and see some awesome scenery or like be in a cool city.
Right.
And every city we went to, man, I was just like, oh, Portland's awesome. Let's move to Portland.
Yes.
You remember me like constantly saying
every place
San
we
Francisco. Went. No, dude, we should move to San Francisco.
In fact, I was looking at, and this was back in 2012. I was looking, 2011, 2012. I was looking at places to live in San Francisco. So I was like, okay, that sounds good. Yeah. And I started looking, and it's like $4,000 for a studio apartment, and that was back then. It's even worse now.
Yeah.
We just did Kevin Rose's show, and that's one of the reasons he left San Francisco, was like the crazy skyrocketing prices of everything. And that's something else you have to keep in mind. She lives in Brooklyn right now. Imagine how the cost of living in New York City, or we're in LA, the cost of living here. I was just having this conversation with our friend Amy from Google, or formerly from Google. She went to go work for a nonprofit. But and one of the things you have to keep in mind, that the reason that LA is a hard city to live in is because the cost of living is astronomical.
Yeah.
The article I just saw, Richard Florida, I believe, did this study. And Sean, if I can find this, I'll send it to you and we can put it in the show notes. But Richard Florida did this study of how much it costs for an apartment in Soho in Manhattan. You could buy over 100 houses in Toledo or Dayton.
It's unbelievable. So the average house in Soho,
yeah, the average
equals over 100
homes.
Average cost of, wow, that's unbelievable. Homes, that is unbelievable.
Yeah, I think you could do 70 in Detroit, and 100 in Youngstown. Wow. I mean, and what was fascinating is cost of living has to play a major factor, and that was one of the things that allowed me to. And we're going to talk about this, I think, with Javier's question coming up next. But the cost of living in Dayton allowed me to pay off my debt. It would have been much harder in a city like Los Angeles for me to become completely debt-free, because by definition, I'm going to spend more money on just my bare essentials, right?
Keeping a roof over your head, keeping yourself fed.
The average house in Los Angeles, not just the nice places like Silver Lake or Los Feliz or West Hollywood or Venice. The average house in all of LA is approaching $600,000 in cost.
It's unbelievable.
And you go to a place like Dayton, you can get a nice house for $60,000. Not an outstanding
$600,000 in Dayton will get you a mansion.
It'll get you the Beverly Hills equivalent times 2. You can probably buy 2 Beverly Hills houses in Dayton.
That's so crazy. It's funny, like, as we're talking about this, I'm asking myself, like, why did we move to LA again? But honestly, man, like, because of the podcast and the projects that we're working on, like, this really is the place to be right now for us.
Right. Keywords right now.
Yeah, right now. And I look at it like an investment. The cost of living, it is, yes, way higher than most places in the U.S. Right. But I don't look at it as like a waste of money. I don't look at it as like anything other than an investment that Mariah and I, not just with our money, but our time too. So, just to Sarah's point, like, she's got to look at, when she moves to another place, if she needs to save some money, great. But saving money isn't always the right reason to pick a place or not.
Right. Although I wouldn't have moved to LA if we were in debt.
No.
And because it would be more difficult to pay off that debt.
Yeah.
So let's talk real quick about, so you sort of illuminated why we moved to LA. That's a place where people go to tell stories.
Do you want to talk about Montana first? Why we moved to Montana
yeah,
first?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's a better starting point. So
Okay.
we were in Dayton, Ohio. We did this 33-city tour with our first book, Minimalism, Live a Meaningful Life.
I wanted to move to every single city
All
that we went to, all 33 cities.
Well, 32 others. It was Dayton and 32 others. But yeah, every time we were there, I mean, I remember being in Knoxville, and we were like,
man, Knoxville's pretty hip.
Yeah, it was great, and I still like Knoxville, right? And what I started to realize is, I can be happy anywhere.
Oh yeah.
It's we don't hate change. We hate being changed. Mm-hmm. But when we implement change on our own, we actually look forward to that, right? And that's why looking at those cities. Now, if someone were to tell you, Ryan, if all of a sudden you would have been told, hey, you have to move to Knoxville, you'd be like, what? Why?
I'd be like, no.
Why? But
I wouldn't like to be forced to move anywhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so what we like is our ability to have control over our own change. When people say, I hate change, I think they're wrong, because if their bank account changes 7 figures in the positive, all of a sudden they're going to be like, yeah, I like that change.
Right.
Well, what we mean is we hate being changed. We hate unexpected change. We hate changes that are thrust upon us. So Sarah's in a good position right now because she's looking for elsewhere. So if she decides to stay in Brooklyn, then she can make that decision on her own. So why did we move out to Montana?
Man, Missoula. What? Yeah. So, God, man, I don't know where to start. I mean, I guess.
How about this? We were at the very end of the tour. The 33rd city was Vancouver, BC.
Yeah, we were finishing it up, driving through Montana, and before we got to Montana, it was late, and we were like, we were in Idaho. We were like, you know what? We're just gonna stop here in Idaho. Yeah. We're gonna spend the night, and then we're gonna get up tomorrow and just like barrel through Montana and get it over with.
We'd never been to Montana, never even thought about Montana.
Yeah, and then we stopped in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and they wanted to charge us like $250 a night for a hotel room,
which was crazy.
I was like,
we're in the panhandle of Idaho, we're in the middle of nowhere.
I'm like, dude, there's no one in your parking lot right now. Like, I don't understand. And he did lower it. Like, I think it was like $200 or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was just telling me, he's like, dude, this is a really nice place. He's like, basically trying to explain to me why it was so expensive. Well, when we woke up in the morning and saw the beauty of Coeur d'Alene, it was like, like this is why it's $200 a night, because it's like a very, very gorgeous, one of the most gorgeous places that I've been to in this country, honestly. And then we started driving into Montana that morning.
Yeah. And
it was just, I don't want to say it was more beautiful or less as much as it was just different beauty around every corner.
For me, it literally was more beautiful. Like, we were in Idaho, and as soon as you cross that line into Montana, for some reason, it's picturesque.
Yeah.
And then we hit that spot. There's this tiny little waterfall right off of I-90.
Well, before that, though, we stopped to get coffee.
In Missoula.
In Missoula, Montana. And what was crazy about Missoula was, we found awesome coffee, and we found awesome fish tacos. And like, so those are two things that when we go to a city, that's what we kind of consider is like, how good is the food?
Yeah.
Can you get some decent food? And, not like sit down restaurant food, but just like, they didn't have a Chipotle. I mean, they have one now, but when we first moved there, they didn't have a Chipotle. That was almost a game breaker or a, game changer, except they had good fish tacos. And it's like, all right, we can do fish tacos instead of Chipotle.
Yeah.
And then I remember just going to, oh no, is it La Petite?
Yeah.
Yeah, La Petite. I was like, I forget the name of the place.
Les Petite.
Les Petite.
Yeah.
We went to Les Petite, Missoula, Montana, which, by the way, awesome bakery, awesome coffee. If you're in Missoula, Montana, definitely go to Les Petite. But I remember the barista waiting on us, and, because, like, I have this, like, this inner hippie in me. I just remember, like, seeing the people working there, and, like, they were so nice, dude. Like, that's the one thing about Montana, about Missoula, is that people don't look at me like I'm weird. Like, when I go up to someone, hey, how's it going? Like, they give me the same energy back.
Yeah.
There's no, like, people don't have a lot of walls up in Missoula, I feel like.
Yeah.
You go up to someone in Dayton, Ohio or Los Angeles, hey, I'm Ryan Nicodemus, and they're going to look at you like, all right, dude, okay, what do you want? What's up? Like, like, they'd be a little bit trepidatious. Where in Missoula, you go up to someone, hey, I'm Ryan Nicodemus. They're like, okay, you're cool until you prove me otherwise.
Right.
So I loved that feeling. But then also, dude, I remember thinking to myself, I could probably find a drum circle here. Like, it'd be really easy to find a drum. Now, I never was in a drum circle. Actually, that's not true. Mariah's mom, they do a couple drum circles a year. And I was like, there was one of them that I was in. It was kind of fun. But But for all intents and purposes, like that was the only drum circle I was ever in 5 years in Missoula.
So we left Les Petits. We got our coffee. We hit the road again. We're on I-90, and then all of a sudden there's this little waterfall off the side of the highway, and it looked like someone was filming an Abercrombie and Fitch ad.
It was just like dudes with raging six packs, like chicks in thongs.
It was skinny dipping, right? And so like there were 6 college kids, 4 women, 2 men. And they were jumping into this little sort of hot spring waterfall thing on the side of the highway. It's the first time in my life I've ever done a triple take. And as I looked over, and this is not made up, a bald eagle flew overhead. Yeah. The only thing more American is if they would have been like waving some sort of American flag, or the eagle had it in its talons or something. Mm-hmm. And what I realized, like this is what advertisements try to affect. Is what's going on right here in Montana today. Now, granted, it was mid-July, early July of 2012, and which, by the way, is the absolute perfect time to be in Montana.
We got so lucky when we were passing through, man.
There's 2 solid months of weather, sometimes only 1 solid month of weather a year in Montana, and in Missoula specifically. And it was like the perfect time. So gorgeous weather, 85 degrees, skinny dipping, beautiful college kids. I've never seen a bald eagle in my life. I'm from Dayton, Ohio. We don't have many bald eagles there unless they're on currency.
Or in a zoo.
Right. and so we sort of looked at each other, and you're like, hey, we should come back out here to write the next book.
Yeah. So for me, it was the community. Uh-huh. It was access to the basic preferences that I had.
Yes.
Good coffee, good fish tacos, good pizza. Although I don't eat pizza anymore. God, I miss pizza. Especially with pineapple on it.
But anyway. What's different about Missoula? I mean, you can get those things pretty much anywhere. You can go to Saskatoon and find good coffee and good people.
Yeah. So what I was getting to is just the community in general. That's what really drew me to Missoula. Not only that, but sweeping mountains, awesome views, and then, kind of totally romanticizing this writer in a cabin on the side of a mountain.
Which is what we did for 4 months. We first moved out there. It was October 3rd, 2012. I remember I arrived there a week before you did. Yeah. And the day I got there, it was snowing. And I don't mean
October.
Early October.
Dude, Mariah and I left for LA in September, and we drove here. It was snowing on the way. It was like the last snow. Anyway,
it was like blizzardy too, right? I mean, and so getting there, I'm like, oh, this is different from what I remember back in July. And so we rented this cabin in the middle of nowhere from Craigslist. And we just wrote and spent those 4 months creating our book, Everything That Remains. Mm-hmm. But then we found ourselves gravitating toward Missoula, which was 2 hours away. Mm-hmm. We lived in this little, it was Phillipsburg, Montana. There's 1 traffic light and 3,400 square miles. But if you really wanted to go to a city, you either went to Butte or you went to Missoula. And we found ourselves gravitating toward Missoula. Mm-hmm. And so at the end of that, we decided, hey, let's actually move to this city. There's 70,000 people there. It's not a massive city, but it feels much more like a city because it's dense, because it's built in between those mountain ranges.
Yeah, Colin also wanted to live with us too.
Yeah,
so this is kind of what spawned us really making this move. Colin was like, man, let's get together, live together for 6 months. Let's see what kind of creations we can make. And, it was time for us to graduate from that small little town. Yeah. And,
so we went into it only planning to be in that cabin for 4 months. And let's see what's going to happen. We didn't have let's move here for the rest of our lives. And I think that's quite often the mentality we get into. It becomes much more difficult to make a decision if the decision is I have to make this decision and stick with it for the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. It's way easier when you're like, hey, I'm going to give myself 4 months here, because you can do 4 months anywhere, right? Mm-hmm. And yes, Colin wanted to come out because we were starting a publishing house together, Asymmetrical Press, and so we set up shop together, the 3 of us, in Missoula, Montana. Yeah. And then we ended up both meeting the loves of our lives in Montana and sticking around there for about 5 years as a result. I will say this, though. You and I differ on Missoula because for me, I didn't find my community there. Yeah. And it was really difficult. I remember being like, I still feel this attachment to Dayton because that was where my community was, and I was unable to find the right people for me in Missoula.
So, I guess, talk about what is community to you? Meaning, so for me, when I say community, it's like Missoula, Montana, I feel like is the only place I could ever live and accidentally fall into the main role of a play.
Right.
I mean, I was at a game night.
Yeah.
And next thing I know, I'm like, got the lead role in this play. And then I was able to make some friends from there. So for me, it's, I guess it's acceptance, really. It's like a community that...
I agree with that.
So
I never felt accepted in Missoula,
really?
By and large. Yeah, there's obvious differences. I mean,
man.
I met Bex out there, and so obviously I felt accepted by her, but and by you and by a few other people whom I met. Our friend Nate Green, we met in Missoula, Montana. And so there was a handful of people. But it was so I agree with you. Acceptance is part of it. I think preferences are another part of it.
Yeah.
Desires, having similar desires as people in the community. And so there weren't a lot of type 3s, the Enneagram type 3 achievers in Missoula, Montana.
Oh, maybe. I don't agree with that. The reason why I say that, though, is because one thing about community for me, too, is how involved are people in the community. How well do they treat their community? And Missoula is tight-knit. Not only that, there are some very, very famous people, producers, directors, writers, old talent agent. Like, there's a ton of talent in Missoula.
Well, there aren't a ton of people there. I think and so like it was more difficult because I'm an introvert and I spend way less time. You and I talk about the three concentric circles of relationship. You have your primary relationships, which are like the 5 people who are closest to you, your immediate family, loved ones. The second layer, your secondary relationships, so your good friends and extended family, and the third layer are your sort of you can either call it acquaintances or you can call the people on the periphery. As an introvert, I have far more people in that third tier on the periphery than you do. You have way more people on the second tier than I do.
Yeah, like I've got a list of people who I never really got to develop relationships with in Missoula, and I remember thinking not even thinking, it happened where when I moved to Missoula, I, had, let's call it 5 people that I was really close to. One would move away, and then I was like, oh, yes, that means I could bring someone else in that I really wanted to get to know.
Right.
And, that list is still pretty long.
Yeah, I mean, I would say,
I understand what you're saying,
if Dunbar's number is 150, you probably have 100 people in that second tier. I have 100 people, 130, 140 people in the third tier. Whereas I have very few secondary relationships. You're either really close to me, or I can still call you a friend and we can hang out once or twice a year, but that's pretty much it for me. I prioritize my time alone first. But when I did want to spend time with people, I just didn't have that community of people in Missoula. It doesn't mean they're wrong or I'm wrong. It was a puzzle piece that didn't fit for me.
Yeah, the one thing that you said that stands out to me is preferences.
Yes.
And I think that's what it comes down to. Because, going back to that introvert who lives in a cabin in the middle of nowhere in Alaska, who would never live in New York, well, vice versa. Like someone in New York may never ever want to go out and live in that cabin in the middle of nowhere.
Exactly.
And it all comes down to preferences.
Yes, absolutely does. So I think when we're talking to Sarah here, she had 2 questions. One is about the location. She feels drained. I don't think it's the location that's draining her necessarily. It might be, but I think it's her profession that is draining her. And it might mean that you have to figure out what your mission is. What's the actual mission, and then how do you fulfill that based on your preferences or your personality? And it might mean that you're helping children by writing textbooks or children's books, and that you're spending most of your time alone in doing that. Or it might mean that you have to find a way to mentor students one-on-one, because with someone like me, I'm much better one-on-one. Whenever we go out as a group, it's really difficult for me to, I get overwhelmed. But if we just have a sit-down one-on-one, in fact, Bex noticed this the other day. Me, you, and Mariah and Bex all went out to dinner, right? The 4 of us went over to Kaya.
Yes.
And afterward, Bex goes, you and Ryan are the only 2 people I know who can just talk together forever. And it's because I have a I mean, I can't even do that with Bex the way that I do it with you.
It's because we've just known each other for so long.
Exactly, and we know what the other person is going to say before they say it quite often.
Yeah.
And we have callbacks and little inside jokes that are only funny to us.
But we think they're really funny.
Yeah, we swear we're the most hilarious people on earth. But
how many times you got to talk about it doing a joke like with the podcast or something, and you're like, dude, there's only 2 people who would find that joke funny.
It's so hyper specific.
Right.
Yeah, and so like you're like, hey, what about Mrs. Cordini? And I'm like, they're not going to get that on the podcast.
Right.
Anyway, shout out to Mrs. Cordini, 8th grade. So what I learned about you and I is like I'm so much better. Even when like the 4 of us were together, it was sort of like you and I siphoned ourselves off and we just had a conversation because it's so much easier for me to do that. You do just as well or maybe even better amongst a group of people, especially people you don't know. For me, like I would just like I want to leave immediately.
Yeah. So I mean, getting back to Sarah here though, she did sound. I mean, to me, she sounded not that she really liked her profession, but that she was excited about her profession. And, you know, it's funny, you were saying maybe it's a profession, not the city. When I think about living in New York City, I get drained just thinking about it.
I agree with that. Oh, New York seems overwhelming to me.
And a lot of people who I talk to who live in New York, the biggest complaint that I hear is how much you have to work in order to afford to live there. So that could be a piece of it for Sarah here.
Well, that's the having to versus getting to, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like the change thing where it's like you may want a change and then you accept it, but if you're forced into working overtime just to pay the rent in a roach-infested New York apartment.
Perfect example is, you know, we would work, you know, 50, 60, 70, 80-hour work weeks.
Yeah.
There are some weeks where we will work 50, 60, 70, 80-hour work weeks. It's definitely far and few between.
You're saying then versus now.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, then versus now. So like now it's like we choose to do it.
Right.
Like you're absolutely right. Like if you were to tell me, all right, Ryan, all right, dude, like in order to make this work, we have to work 80 hours a week from now on, I would be like, dude, like we have to reconsider. But, you know, if we are on tour, you know, I mean, when we're on tour, I mean, we're pretty much working all day. We get to sleep at night. And you know, 75% of the nights we get, you know, 8 hours, a chance to sleep 8 hours, but 25% we don't.
Right.
But it is much different, like choosing to do that rather than like, just like having that being forced into it.
Being in control is part of it. And right now, it sounds to me like what Sarah is dealing with, she feels like she's not in control, and that's why she feels depleted. So there's a good kind of tired and a bad kind of tired, right? You go to the gym and you work out really hard. Nicodemus lifts all the weights.
All of them.
And then afterward...
They got to bring weights in from the back.
Afterward, though, you feel like a good kind of tired. You feel exhausted, but in a good way.
Yeah.
Now, she feels depleted in a bad way.
Yeah.
And where she doesn't feel like she has the adequate time for recharging. Now, if you leave the gym, you're like, I'm exhausted, I'm going to come back in 40 minutes. Well, all of a sudden, it's going to be like, then that doesn't feel good. You're going to feel depleted, but when you come back 40 minutes later, you're like, I have to lift these weights again? And so there's also that time for recovery, and that's why I suspect she's an introvert. I feel like she's not getting enough time alone to recharge on her own. And then that leads into her second question. She says, well, then I feel like I'm oversimplifying, right? Do I ever get there? Do I ever get to this minimalist life?
No,
I mean, I don't think so.
I'm almost there, dude. I am so close.
Well, what I've realized is that, yes, you'll get somewhere that you wanted to be, but then there's always going to be somewhere else you want to be, and thank goodness for that, right? Yeah. Like, I feel really happy that we're living here in Los Angeles now. We've got a beautiful studio set up. I'm really happy with the apartment that I live in. I know you're happy with your new apartment that you're in, and this works really well for right now, but it doesn't mean that we won't want to change some point in the future.
Yeah.
And
circumstances are guaranteed to change.
Yes.
Like there's that absolutely. So minimalism, you know, when I first saw it, it was never a destination for me. It was like this common sense philosophy that I was like, oh, like I just need to apply these principles to my life and maybe I can regain some of that control.
Right.
But But yeah, anything could be taken too far, right?
Well, yes, yeah. I mean, I think that if it's reactionary, the thing we were talking about earlier, we were doing the YouTube pre-roll thing, acting versus reacting, and maybe that's the question that Sarah's trying to figure out here: is she reacting to the job, and does that make her want to move away, or is she wanting to take action because that's the appropriate next step in her life?
Yeah, when it comes to simplifying and her talking about how she's kind of become addicted to it, or maybe she's like overdoing it, just to reiterate, like, you can take anything and overdo it. She even talks about, the word obsession she used in her question. And obsession can be a really beautiful thing.
Yes.
It really can be, until it becomes compulsive.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, in fact, I think that we often get confused and we think removing the clutter is the end result. But you and I sometimes talk about how it's really just the first step. You're getting rid of the excess so you can make room for your health or your finances or your creativity or your career or your ability to contribute. You're making room for those things. That's the point. That's the purpose of simplifying. There are other benefits, like it's nice to feel calm in your own home. It's nice to get the excess stuff out of the way. You feel better coming home to an intentionally curated home.
Absolutely.
But that is not the point, just the simplifying. So ask yourself why, not just the how-to side of things.
Well, and the cool thing for Sarah is, so she has minimized her life up to this point, to the point where, she's talking about maybe she's taking it too far. But the cool thing is that if she does need to pick up and move, she can do that very easily. Yeah. And that's what I appreciate about, like, Mariah and I's possessions and what we have in our lives as physical things. It's the right amount.
Moving always sucks, but it's easier when you're a minimalist.
Man. I can turn my life around on a dime. It's really freeing.
And part of the reason you could turn your life around on a dime is because you're untethered from those expectations as well, where it's like, well, now I'm going to live here for the rest of my life, and I'm going to have this particular career for the rest of my life, and I'm going to have a family that looks like this for the rest of my life. No, you're not tethered to that. You're tethered. You're untethered, which is freeing, so that you can explore as your preferences, desires, personality changes over the years, which it should.
Yeah. So I think Sarah should get clear on those preferences, and if she wants to leave New York, that's okay. But instead of running from New York, she really has to be clear on what she's running towards. So Sarah, maybe it's time to graduate from New York City, and that's okay.
Yeah. And by the way, you can go back if you ever make the wrong decision. I mean, that's the thing. And hopefully at the end of this, I'm going to talk about some of my favorite cities and why they're some of my favorites. What I'm realizing with Sarah here is you're going to make some sort of decision. And it may not be the perfect decision, but whatever the decision is, you're going to learn from it. The important thing is to take some sort of action to move beyond the situation that's comfortable right now. And that's what kept me where I was for a long time. I was 60% comfortable. Everything was 6 out of 10. And it's like, well, I don't want to feel any real pain. I don't want this to be a 2 or a -2 or a -5 experience. So I'm going to stay here in my comfort zone. But after a time, that comfort zone becomes unsettling. It becomes uncomfortable because we're no longer growing. We're not being the best version of ourselves, and then what we desire is no longer being met. Sarah, I'd love to send you a copy of our book, Everything That Remains. So Ryan and I, in that book, we talk about life in Dayton, Ohio, and we're paying off some of our debts. But also, we talk about moving to that cabin in the middle of nowhere, and there's a whole chapter about that experience. And then the last chapter in the book is actually about our move to Missoula, Montana, and then where we're going to go from there. There's sort of the end of the book talks about like being open to moving to these other locations. Location has played a big part in our lives, and of course it played a big part in that book as well. So Sean, if you could reach out to Sarah, send her an audiobook version of Everything That Remains. If you like our podcast, you like the audiobook version, or if you want the book or the ebook, we'll send that to you as well. Our next question is from Javier in Orlando.
I'm 42 years old. I have a wife and a 7-year-old son. I recently lost my job, and I am one of those guys who climbed the corporate ladder, worked at a very very nice corporate job as a director and making well into six figures. And luckily for me, I lost my job because I've been trying to follow my passion, which is to create and develop video games. And I've always wanted to pursue it, but my debt and my consumption always got in the way. So I have been trying to work with my spouse to be able to find a new way to downsize, take the equity in our house, pay off our bills. We have a condo that's $80,000 that we owe on it that we would like to pay off. It's my mother-in-law, so we need to pay that off. I also have about $23,000 in that student loan debt from getting my master's degree and my 4-year degree that I would like to pay off. And then I would also like to put a good chunk down on a house. And finding a home for under $300,000 is very difficult in our area. I know that downsizing to a smaller house that fits what your needs are is the key. But what about the location? Because a lot of times when you downsize, you're also downsizing the quality of your neighbors and the location that you're in. And if you have children, you have to consider those things, especially with the school system. So I want to hear your thoughts on what would be your recommendation for downsizing, but also taking into consideration the location, because you end up with a smaller property, you end up closer to people, you lose some of your privacy, and a lot of times you also have a lesser location.
Dude, this is important to consider, man.
Which part?
Well, that he's downsizing, and yes, I think as a minimalist, we're trying to find the space that's most appropriate for us.
Right. But
so
he didn't,
if he's got too big of a space.
But he alluded to that, but I don't know that he said that. And I'm a little worried here because he didn't allude to the fact that his space was too big or inappropriate for his life.
Yeah, I think it was about expenses is what he was talking about.
Yeah.
So he's trying to save some money. So it is so important to consider all these factors that he's talking about when he's moving. So he's
right, but I disagree with the sentiment. He said, I know that downsizing, I wrote this down, downsizing is the key. Downsizing is not the key. Being debt-free is the key for him right now.
Yeah.
And I think pursuing the wrong thing, if your pursuit is downsizing, you'll never have a small enough house because you get into the 200 square foot house and you see someone with a 150 square foot house.
Yeah, that's the way I took when he said downsizing is key. To me, it sounded like ultimately what he was saying is downsizing is what it's going to take for me and my family to get to the meaningful life that we want to get to.
Okay.
So considering that, yes, like if you want to live in Beverly Hills, right, you're going to pay a premium. Now it's a nicer neighborhood, maybe nicer school district, right, so forth and so on. You move to South Central, it's going to be a lot more affordable, not the best school district.
Right. However, so there has to be a middle ground there somewhere,
absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
And just because the cost of your house, he said if you're downsizing the size of your house, it means you might have to move to a different neighborhood, and you're downsizing the quality of the relationships in the neighborhood. I don't agree with that. I mean, you and I grew up really poor, and there were great people and there were terrible people living in our respective neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And we are fortunate enough now to not living in a neighborhood like that. However, there are still good people and bad people who live in my apartment building that we live in.
Yeah.
And so I think that just because you're downsizing your space doesn't mean that you downsize the quality of your relationships.
Of course
not. Most of the sort of middle income houses that he's talking about, you often improve your relationship because you become you enter into a proximity of a community of people who care about that community.
Well, I mean, the things that he listed off, he said, smaller property, quality of neighbors, school system, closer to people, lose some privacy, lesser location. I mean, those sounds like those are preferences that are very, very important to him.
Sure.
And my biggest advice, Javier, is just like with Sarah, get clear on your preferences, get clear on your family's preferences. That's where you've got to start. I mean, it's the same thing with where we started with minimalism. It was, let's get clear on what our actual priorities are. And now let's talk about how we can act on these priorities and live a meaningful life. It's the same thing here is where Javier needs to get clear on what his preferences are And once he has those uncovered, then he can start approaching neighborhoods and start approaching houses and figuring out what is going to be within his price range, and he's going to compromise as little preferences as possible. I think there's always a compromise. Like when I think about Mariah and I's new place, our place is awesome, dude. One of the best views I have seen in the city. Like it's so freaking. The only view better that I can think of is on top of the Netflix building. That one is awesome. But the neighborhood sucks. Like, dude, I was telling Sean, I was walking to work this morning. There was at least a half a dozen people just like sleeping on the street, and it's not that I have anything against homeless people, but it just tells the type of neighborhood that it's in. It's in Hollywood. It's a bit rough around the edges in Hollywood. It's safe. I just had this realization the other day, like, my life's probably not in danger around here. Like I might get heckled, or someone might, there might be a crazy person like throwing something at me, but like it's really not that dangerous. But what I'm getting at is that Mariah and I, we chose and we discussed what our preferences were. We got really
and you
clear
rank
on
them.
those.
You prioritize what your preferences are.
And the view was huge for us. Like the view was like number 1 or number 2.
And for me, it doesn't matter at all. And so you have to factor that in, right?
Yeah. So the neighborhood for us, it was obviously lower on the preferences.
Yeah, and for me, it was much higher.
Right.
I wanted a particular type of walkability and
particular group of people to be around, a community.
Yes.
Like I would definitely say I don't want to say that the neighbors that we have are lesser quality than the neighbors that you have.
Right.
But, to Javier's point, like there's a different community in Hollywood versus where you're at.
Yeah. And so the thing that I wanted to say early on to Javier was congratulations for losing your job. Sometimes we need to be pushed.
He said,
right?
Luckily, I lost my job.
Yeah.
Dude, that is so awesome.
It's great framing. And I say bravo to you for that.
Heck
However, you have debt right now. You might have to find another job temporarily.
Yeah, man.
And I think that's an important thing to realize. It doesn't mean you have to go back and be in the corporate world for a long period of time, but you have to figure, if your outcome is to get out of debt, then that requires you're going to have to do some stuff that don't align with your long-term vision, but your long-term vision is actually to live life debt-free. Now, you've got some other stuff here. It sounds like he has $23,000 of student loans. Not that big of a deal on the grand scope of things, but you have an $80,000 condo. You said it's your mother-in-law's condo. I have no idea what you're doing with that, but you don't. If you owe money on that, get rid of it. If you have a rental property but you don't actually own it, the bank owns it, find a way to get rid of that, because that is a burden on you right now. Now, that said, it could also be a blessing if it's paid off and it's making you rental income every month, and that is great, but you're not in a position to be in debt for a rental property. And so whatever you have to do to get out of debt, that sounds like he wants to sell his house, he wants to sell this condo. But you're also going to, if that doesn't get you the money you need to pay off your house and put enough down on a smaller house and pay off the rest of your debt, then you're going to have to get a job for a while. And there's no shame in that. It's okay. In fact, there should be a lot of pride in I'm working my butt off so I can become debt-free, and I'm never going to go back into debt again, other than this mortgage, which, by the way, I'm going to hustle really hard to pay off this mortgage too.
Yeah, man, Javier, when you get debt-free, buddy, that is like the sound of debt-free doesn't feel like the feeling it gives you when you think about being debt-free. It's the feeling is so much better when you are actually debt-free.
Right.
Like I felt even more free than I thought I was going to feel being debt-free. But getting back to what you talked about earlier, he's got to find the middle ground here.
Yes.
I mean, if it's about saving money and getting debt-free, and if that's his number one goal, then move to Boone County, Kentucky. Go buy yourself a decent house for $20,000 and pay off your debt. Now, probably don't want to move to Boone County, Kentucky, but that's why it's so important to find this middle ground.
Yeah.
So when they're listing out preferences, how do you prioritize those? Meaning, do you look at the top 5? Because for Mariah and I think maybe we probably looked at the top 5. But I guess, do you got any advice on that go for it?
Yeah, so I think it requires the whole family.
Absolutely.
Your son's 7, so I wouldn't consider his preferences nearly as much. And in fact, I think that's one of the problems we often do is we over-consider our children's preferences. Like, what? Hey, sweetheart, what do you want for dinner? No, here's what you're going to eat for dinner. You're 7 years old. And I'm going to decide, because you're going to say you want, Pop-Tarts or whatever for dinner. You don't get to decide that, right? So However, you want to keep your son's best interest in mind when you're making it. That's part of the decision. And someone who's 7 doesn't always have their own long-term best interests in mind.
Yeah.
I think back to Dayton, Ohio is a good example. It's not just the city, it's the neighborhood, depending on what your preferences are, right? Like if I move back to Dayton now, I'd probably want to move to a place like Oakwood because their schools are an A, and Dayton Public City schools are graded an F. And even though they're half a mile apart, literally, I mean, you go to University of Dayton and you cross the street, you're in Oakwood, but you're in an A school district, and that would make sense. However, last time I lived there, I didn't want to live in Oakwood because I wanted to be downtown, right? And so I had the schools did not play a role in my decision making, and so schools are going to be important for you. Walkability might be important for you, or it might not matter at all. Our good friend TK Coleman, he just moved to South Carolina from Los Angeles, and
obviously he doesn't care about hurricanes.
he's in Atlanta while the hurricane.
By the way, hope
on.
Everyone who lives in South Carolina hearing this is safe and sound, and their friends and family and stuff.
And anywhere in the Carolinas for sure.
Absolutely.
But he lives on. He's moving to like this. I guess there's an island there that you can drive to, and for me, proximity to the office is really important. Like I live 2.5 miles from the studio right here, and so I can walk here if I want to, or if I'm going to drive here, it takes me just less than 15 minutes to get here, right? However, for him, he wanted to be in a neighborhood that worked well for him. He had the grocery. He wanted to be away from. He wanted to be really close to nature and wanted to be away from the sort of hustle and bustle of the city. So he drives 30 to 45 minutes each way to work and back because he doesn't mind the commute. In fact, he enjoys the commute for him because it allows him to listen to audiobooks and gives him some alone time. For me, I remember when I was. Actually, here's a similar example when. I got the promotion. I was working downtown Cincinnati. I still live downtown Dayton, and I made that 55-mile drive. Sometimes it would take me an hour and a half, 2 hours to make it down to Cincinnati because I wanted to live in Dayton over Cincinnati. I had a preference there, right? And part of that has to do with logically looking at these things and saying, okay, here are my 100 preferences, 50 preferences, whatever they are. Write them all down with the people in your household, but then also realize the logical side that isn't going to get you 100% of the way there. Sometimes it's about how a particular neighborhood or city or community is going to make you feel. It's unquantifiable. You just know you feel a certain way when you're there.
So they got a list of 50 preferences. They can't obviously honor all 50 preferences. I mean, maybe they can. I'm not saying it's impossible, but probably not the right expectation.
No, but then you prioritize and you say, what is most important to me? And so each of you picks your top 3. Here are the things that really make the most sense. Bex and I did our top 5, and we had a list of the things that are, here are our 10 preferences. Now, there was some overlap for us as well. And realizing, like, okay, if you're getting this, I may not get this.
Right.
But what is going to be the thing that makes us most happy together? And realizing, I know Bex, she really wanted to live close to the beach when we moved out here. But like we also realized it wasn't a big enough preference that we were going to use it, that we were going to use the access to the beach every day. And by the way, we still have access to the beach now. We just have to drive half an hour west to get there, right? And realizing like, oh, just because it's right there, you live a block from the subway. Yeah. I don't know how often you use it.
Well, yeah, I've actually not been on it once yet, but I was talking to Mariah about this the other day. We need to get on there and just like ride the subway for a day and kind of check it out.
I mean, I've done that with Ella.
It takes an hour and a half or like hour and 20 minutes to get to Santa Monica from the subway. I could drive there in like 30, 45 minutes depending on traffic.
Yeah, because you have to go downtown in order to get
transfer
there.
And stuff.
My point is, it sounds really good when you move there, but if you're like, oh yeah, if that becomes your decision for moving there, we can justify anything. We start to say, well, yeah, it's really close to the subway, that's why I'm moving there, and then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, I use it once a week.
Right.
Wait a minute. Now for me, walkability is something that is most important. I walk places every day. I go often, we were talking about this before the podcast. I'll go 3, 4, 5 days without using my car. Yeah. Sometimes a week without using my car. And that's why that was something something that was like top on my list. Great weather, which you're going to get pretty much anywhere in Los Angeles, was part of the thing on my list. In fact, it was one of the big bummers for me living in Missoula. Is I'm really affected by sort of like seasonal, they call it depression or
seasonal grayness.
Yeah, and Missoula gets really gray in the winter, snowy and gray.
Yeah.
And it's very Pacific Northwest plus snow. And so there's like this 9-month period where you have to deal with winter. And it definitely affected my mood because I wasn't able to walk a lot outside. I'd have to go to the gym and just walk around the track for hours at a time.
Right. And
it was just not appropriate for me. In the summer, it was great.
Yeah.
It was really great. But after that, it was like, oh, like this doesn't match my preferences. So if we're talking to Javier here, and I think you have to get really clear on what, if you and your wife sit down and say, okay, there's the three of us, my wife, our 7-year-old son, and me, what does my ideal neighborhood look like? Is it in Orlando? It may or may not be. You might love your community there in Orlando. It may be somewhere else. You might move over to St. Petersburg because you're like, I really like how great it is over there, or St. Augustine, or maybe you go somewhere else altogether. Maybe you go to Dayton, Ohio, because the cost of living is so cheap there. And you can, by the way, you can design video games from anywhere in the world. Or maybe there's a place like LA or elsewhere where there's this big video game design community, and it makes sense to have proximity to those people. That's one of the reasons we came to Los Angeles. We wanted proximity to, I mean, in LA, you get proximity to people. This is where entertainment is, where people go to make movies and tell stories and be on our podcast. We have access to more people here than we did in Missoula, Montana, or somewhere else.
Yeah, dude, and I cannot agree with you more about just because the neighborhood is less expensive, that you're going to have like a less quality of neighbors. In fact, thinking about that, like in the nicer neighborhoods, you actually might have worse neighbors. You know what I'm saying? Like,
That's true.
You can have good or bad neighbors no matter where you go.
How do you define good and bad, right?
Right, exactly.
Like, what does a good neighbor look like to you? Because, I was going to talk about this during the added value, but I sent you that documentary. I don't know if you saw it yet on Dayton, Ohio. It's called Left Behind America. And I know a lot of my friends in Dayton aren't very happy with the way Frontline portrayed the city.
Right.
Because there's a lot of despair in this documentary. We'll put a link to it in the show notes. But it shows the despair side of Dayton, and particularly West Dayton, where we're trying to build the grocery store there. There's not 40% of Dayton's population lives on the west side. There's not a single grocery store in the entire west side of Dayton. But there's also a whole bunch of drug overdoses going on in Dayton. There's a whole like overdose police force helping people out because there's an opioid epidemic there. A lot of it had to do with the fact that a lot of people lost their jobs there when GM left. And they were very physical jobs. So very physical jobs often lead to back pain or shoulder pain or knee pain, ankle pain, whatever. And so they were prescribed a lot of opioids during this period of time. And then you lose your job, you lose your insurance, and then you can't afford the prescription drugs, and people are often turning to heroin. And there's a whole bunch of overdoses because there's fentanyl mixed in with the heroin now, and there's a huge like drug problem going on all across America. I mean, Dayton is just like Buffalo or Rochester or Akron or Toledo or any of these other cities where a lot of manufacturing base was established, and then people lost their jobs. But what the documentary didn't show, it showed a little bit of the hope. At the very end, there's like 5 to 10 minutes of, oh, there's actually hope here because there are people in the community. In West Dayton, one of the poorest neighborhoods in the country. Yeah, there are people over there that are working on a solution. There's outstanding people in this outstanding city. They're trying to build a grocery store. There's just so much revitalization going on in Dayton. They didn't show that piece. They shined the light on the problems and gave you a little bit of hope, but to me it's 50-50. I saw real hope there because of the community, because the people are working together. You and I have worked together at the House of Bread in Dayton a bunch of times. Yeah. And you realize, like, these people who are volunteering here are people who are making $25,000 a year. They're not rich. Right. And there are other people who are making $250,000 a year who are also volunteering right next to them. Yeah. Because they have a common objective, and it's helping the people in their community. And so ultimately, the question is, how are you going to Find a community in which you can participate. Now, participating might mean working in a soup kitchen.
Yeah.
It might mean doing Habitat for Humanity, or it might mean just going and having game night with the other people in your community, if that's something you want to do. What does participation look like in your plan here? All right, well, Javier, I would love to send you a copy of our book, Essential. It's an essay collection with 150 different essays in it, but there's 12 different chapters, and there's a chapter about downsizing in there. It's called Stuff. That's the name of the chapter. 12 different areas of living an intentional life are outlined in that book. So, Sean, if you could send Javier a copy of Essential, either the audiobook, the ebook, or the book, I would appreciate it. And, of course, we'd love to hear what y'all have to say. So if you have a comment or a tip about, well, the city you live in or the location you're moving to, including advice for any of our callers today, leave us a voicemail, 406-219-7839. You can also email a voice memo to podcast@theminimalists.com. We'll air our favorite comments and tips on a future episode. And stay tuned to the end of this episode for this week's listener comments and tips. Ryan, what time is it?
It's time for our lightning round, where we answer questions from the social medias.
Indeed, we're on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram @theminimalists. During the lightning round, this is where Ryan and I each do our best to answer every question with just a short, shareable, less than 140 character response. We'll also put the text of those minimal maxims in the show notes so you can copy and share our pithy answers on social media if you'd like. And now you can find all of our quotes in one place, minimalmaxims.com.
Our first question is from Shane. Shane writes in, why are some places happier than others? For example, why is Denmark happier overall? Happier than the U.S.?
Well, I mean, so I have a pithy answer that I'll share in a second, but Denmark itself isn't happy. It is an inanimate state, an inanimate piece of land with borders drawn around it, right? And so the people in Denmark are on average happier based on some fairly subjective surveys as well, right? Happiness is obviously subjective, right? So my pithy answer, though, and keep this in mind, my pithy answer is, don't mistake others' happiness for your own. And I think first you look at some of the happiest countries. There are some of the safest countries.
Yeah.
But then also the least happy countries are often the least safe countries. You look at places like Chad. It's one of the most unhappy places on earth because it's so dangerous. Or South Sudan.
Wow.
Very dangerous. So it's hard to be happy when your life is in danger all day, right?
Yeah.
However, some of the least happy countries are also countries like Luxembourg, which makes the most money per capita in the entire world. Least happy country, least happy developed country is Luxembourg. Now, so there is a certain level of safety that lends itself to happiness flourishing. But beyond that, more money isn't going to make you safer or happier or more content. In fact, it can make you more isolated. And that's what I think you're seeing in a place like Luxembourg. If you feel more isolated, you might feel less happy. And so when I look at the happiness of a place, I don't want to confuse my happiness for someone else's happiness. You and I could go live in Edmonton. In fact, I'd love to live in Edmonton.
Yeah, Saskatoon.
Yes, these are good. I could be happy there, regardless of whether or not that most people identify that place with happiness. And also, I could move to Denmark and be miserable. A lot of that has to do with my own mindset.
Yeah, I think being around happy people is going to make someone. It's going to give them the chance to be happier, but it doesn't guarantee someone's happiness. Yeah. So just just kind of adding to your point about don't mistake other people's happiness for your own. I mean, that's why it's like if you're a miserable, depressed person, you might just actually make everyone else unhappy around you if you move to where everyone's happy. I mean, it's a possibility, but I do understand that. Yes, the more happy people you hang around, then the more of a chance you have to be happy, I guess. I mean, I could see that correlation too. My pithy answer is the more we contribute to our community, the happier we make our community. Dude, this, for me, going back to Missoula, that is why, going back to the drum circle thing, man, like it's not the actual drum circle as much as it was the community was so, I felt like it was very welcoming. And I remember hanging out at the Top Hat. Shout out to the Top Hat in Missoula. We're out back. It's like a little concert venue. Yeah. You've been there.
Oh, yeah.
Sean's been there
a couple months ago.
Podcast Sean's been there. We were out back on the patio, and I was just like having a beer, and I was talking to someone out there. I'd probably we just moved there, probably a month I'd been there, and I was just talking to someone about how awesome Missoula was. I was like, dude, and I'm telling him everything that I told you, the story about La Petite, the waterfall, the little hot warm springs, how awesome the community is. And he's like, dude, he said, the reason why this community works is because everyone has to be that way. If people go out of their way to be accepting, if people don't go out of their way to contribute to the community, well, then this doesn't work. Yeah. And the only reason it works is because everyone contributes. So we can, by contributing to our community, I mean, maybe it's just like a fraction, but we do make a happier community.
Yeah, it's that same conversation I was having with Amy about the cost of living in a place like LA. Also, Dayton doesn't, even though for all its struggles with lack of food, lack of the opioid problem, the underemployment or unemployment problem, there are problems there. There also isn't much of a homeless problem. There isn't a significant homeless problem because the cost of living is way cheaper in a place like Dayton. You go to downtown Los Angeles, you go to Skid Row, and you're faced with a significant homeless problem. I think there's 90,000 homeless people in Los Angeles, and a big chunk of the reason why has to do with the housing affordability.
And the weather too in LA is pretty nice.
Yeah, absolutely. But you go to a place that has higher homelessness. There are several studies out there now that will show you it often has to do with the public policies for keeping housing really high. The expense of housing is a key factor in the amount of homelessness that happens in a city, and so that's something worth keeping in mind. I look at again that goes back to the dangerous thing. If you're homeless or you're not living in a place that you feel safe, then it's going to affect your happiness. Beyond that, though, meeting the basic requirements for your own safety and certainty, it has a lot more to do with being steeped in a community that is willing to help each other out.
Yeah, I could not agree more. All right, Valerie wants to know, when selecting a place to live, how important are transportation options?
Well, my short answer to that is
if we can't own a Lamborghini, then we ain't moving there.
No, I didn't write that down. Oh. To get where you're going, you must have a way to get there.
Yeah.
I mean, that's my pithy answer. Transportation, it depends on what you mean by transportation. I own a car. That is transportation. I have 2 legs, thankfully, and that allows me to walk a bunch of places I want to walk. And so for me, having access, being in a centrally located neighborhood was something that was important to me. Public transit in a lot of cities, like especially Los Angeles, public transit is not great. There are other cities like New York City where public transit is truly outstanding. If you want to get somewhere, it's going to make less sense for you to own a car if you're living in Manhattan than if you're living in Los Angeles. However, in a place like Los Angeles, it's 88 different municipalities in LA County. You can walk a lot of LA's is actually very walkable as long as you're not trying to go from Pasadena to Venice, right?
Right.
And even then, public transit, you can do that. You can get from Venice to Pasadena.
Yeah.
You take a bus up to Santa Monica, then you take a line downtown. You go from downtown up to Pasadena. But it's also going to, and I've done this with Ella, it's going to take you 2.5 hours probably to get out there. And so you have to keep that in mind. Where are you going? And then living in proximity to that is also pretty helpful.
Yeah, the vehicle we regularly use isn't nearly as important as sticking to our budget. So ultimately for me, man, it doesn't matter. Like, I prefer public transit. We don't have awesome public transit in LA, so I use my car more than public transit. I mean, I've used the bus system a couple times. But like, I would prefer a system like Portland. Like, Portland's got this awesome public transit system.
Right.
That would be ideal for me. However, you can't always get that. You can't always, get your number one preference. So for me, it's not about moving to a city where they have to have this awesome public transit as much as it's like, am I going to be able to get from point A to point B without going into debt? That's really what it comes down to. And can I afford it?
Right. Or if public transit is your number one preference, then be honest with yourself about that, right? If that is the number one way you want to get around and that's really important to you, then consider that closely when you're like, okay, short commute for me is a big preference, right? Having access to walkability is a big preference for me, but that may not be your preference. So just asking the blanket question, how important are the transportation options? That's a question I would actually put back on Valerie here, is how important are they to you? When I look at TK Coleman, he would rather drive 45 minutes and live in the neighborhood in which he wants to live than live really close to the office and not live somewhere he wants to live. All right, P.S. Ryan, we have one more question. That question is from Gary. Gary asks, what is it about turning 40 years old that makes me want to throw away all my stuff, sell my house, and move to literally any other city? I can definitely resonate with this, but if you want to hear our answer to that question, you can listen to this week's postscript episode over at the Minimalists private podcast, available exclusively to our Patreon supporters. So if you want to support our show and keep this podcast 100% advertisement free, then head on over to theminimalists.com/support. In addition to our weekly postscript episodes, the Minimalist private podcast feed includes our monthly Ask the Minimalist Anything episodes, unreleased recordings of our live events, and the entire back catalog of past private episodes. And once you become a supporter, you'll receive a personal link to our private podcast feed so that it plays right there in your normal podcast player. You can find all the details and all the good stuff over at theminimalists.com/support. And here is a snippet from this week's postscript episode. It was just running away from something. And I think that's what it is. It's wanting to change our geography. We think that's going to change the situation we're in. But unless we fix the situation that we're in, changing the geography is probably just going to get you right back into that same situation, or maybe even worse, because you're no longer surrounded by any of the support group that you had previously. All right, Ryan, now it's time for our added value portion of the show, so we each talk about something that has added value to our lives recently. I was going to just talk about, I wanted to talk about that documentary, first and foremost. Like that, the Left Behind America, like it left an impact on me. I shared it with some friends, and I started it's really difficult for me to tear up about anything, but like you could see a community that truly cares. And I get some of the complaints from the documentary, especially if you live in Dayton. It makes the city look way worse than it actually is. But the other problem can also be true. Like you and I could go make a documentary about the city of Dayton and make it look super, super rosy. Yeah. Because I am a raving fan when it comes to Dayton, Ohio. Yeah. And I could just show you all the really cool stuff. The world's largest claw over at Proto Build Bar. You know what I'm talking about, right? I do, yeah. It's $5 to play the claw game. Right. And I mean, seriously,
Tie 9, Press Coffee.
Yeah, Press Coffee House, best coffee house in Ohio, one of the best in the entire country. Press Coffee House. They just opened up a second location. They're working on a second location.
Get out of here!
Over in Belmont.
That's awesome, man. Yeah. If they're listening to this, congratulations, guys. That's awesome.
Yeah, and so Press has opened up a second location. Tie 9 is the best Thai food in the country. The Air Force Base is there. I mean, the museum.
Air Force Museum. Yeah.
Yeah, the base is there too.
Well, yeah,
that's where I was born.
You can't really get on the base unless you have clearance, but
yeah. I mean, I was born there. I snuck in.
You snuck into this world, Millie.
I used to actually manage a retail store at the Air Force Base. Did you ever go to that one?
I never was there. We had it there it was temporary, right?
Less than a year. Yeah. But it was a really strange thing. Like the base has its own sort of shopping mall only for employees. Yeah, that's really wild. So I managed a retail store up there. So I had clearance to get on. They make you do a whole background check and everything. But so Dayton, Ohio has a lot to recommend. So I could show you that side of Dayton, or I could show you what the downtrodden side. But guess what? I could do that with LA. I could do that with Philadelphia.
Yeah. We were just talking about that in Sao Paulo. It's like, oh yeah, people were trying to scare us so much. They weren't trying to scare us. They were just trying to make sure we were safe. Sure. To the point where I started to get trepidation, like just to walk down the street. And then I totally pushed through that because that's what I do. And then Sean and I are walking around, and I'm like, dude, this is just like LA. It's like, there are places you go and you don't go. Yeah. There are places that are perfectly safe at night, and then there are places you wouldn't even dare go at night.
In the same city. And
absolutely.
That's how Dayton, Ohio is. That's how Los Angeles is, San Francisco, everywhere else. I mean, you go pretty much anywhere, and you're going to find that. and finding what is appropriate for you is going to be different, also depending on where you are in life. Now, I can tell you that documentary, it shined a light on the need for some change, also the people who have been left behind.
Do you think maybe the documentary was so, I want to say harsh, but that's not the right word, but just for the sake of keeping this conversation going, do you think the documentary was so harsh towards Dayton, Ohio, to really call to attention how much help people need? And not just in Dayton, but you think about places like Detroit. I mean, there are a lot of cities where you've got this downtrodden, they've got drug problems, they've got poverty, they've got crime, and personally, I feel like that we do need to do something. We are. I mean, we're trying to help Gem City build their grocery store there.
Right.
So, do you think maybe they heavy-handed it? Maybe that's the right word. They heavy-handed the bad side of Dayton.
Yeah.
Because they wanted to really motivate people to help Dayton.
I think so. Yeah, and I mean. And that's why I get it. Like, I was talking to my friend Mike about this, and he was like, yeah, because I was like, look, Dayton's beautiful. There's all these revitalizing efforts throughout the city, but also there is this other side. And I saw a lot of hope in that despair.
Yeah.
And he goes, well, yeah, you and I know what's going on in Dayton, but to the outside person, this isn't going to make someone want to move here.
No.
Well, that's not the point of the documentary.
Right.
Although for me, it actually did. I saw it and I'm like, I want to help.
Yeah.
And I don't have to move there to help, but I.
No, I mean, we're helping now with, like, we just talked about.
Yeah, with the Gem City thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it made me actually want to not be complacent. And it should spur some people into action. And to answer your question, I think what they were trying to show, Dayton is middle America. Although in the early 1900s, it was Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Dayton had more patents per capita. NCR was there. The Wright brothers are there. There was this thriving community of people in the first half of the 20th century where it was the Silicon Valley. It was the hub of American innovation.
Yeah.
And it's not that anymore, but it also shows you that this booming place, just like Silicon Valley is now, that can have a downturn. That any place, even though it's thriving right now, can have a downturn.
Yeah, dude, it's just funny too, because I think there's something to be said about complacency too. Like when I think about the arcade, for example, like that was
Dayton Arcade.
Yeah, the Dayton Arcade. It was predicated off of consumerism, and when I think about that empty building that we were in. It was a representation of what happens when you focus only on consumerism.
Well, and what's fascinating about that is it started as a community hub, and that's when it thrived, right?
Right, and then it turned into consumerism.
Exactly.
So I think the same thing I'm trying to get at is with complacency. When you are, have the most patents, you're the Silicon Valley of your day. Like, you start to become complacent and you start to just look in the mirror and say, yep, we're awesome. And then it's awesome until it isn't.
Yeah. In fact, they had the mayor in this documentary, the guy who was mayor, I think from 82 to 86. And what one of my friends told me was like, yeah, he's basically one of the people who presided over the downturn and didn't do anything about it because there were people in the community who were being complacent. I mean, one of the lines that the mayor said was, we thought NCR would be here forever and we're still upset about it. And it's like, well, the problem is...
You became complacent.
You became complacent.
You assumed that everything was going to stay the same for all eternity. What a bad leader.
Yes.
Like, that's horrible, dude.
Oh, absolutely. So the thing I wanted to talk about, Ryan, was my 5 favorite cities. We've been all over the world, but my 5 favorite cities in North America. I have them written down here. We can talk about each of them briefly, but part of it has to do with the way a place makes me feel when I go there. Like you said, we went on that first tour, and yeah, every city I go to, I really would like to live in Kansas City. This is really great. But after looking at it sort of objectively and subjectively, my 5 favorite cities are Oakland, because it reminds me of Dayton, but with really nice weather. And it's nice and walkable. It's crazy expensive now. It wasn't always that way, but because San Francisco is so expensive, Oakland has become...
10 years ago, people were not saying, let's move to Oakland.
No. Now it's like, wow, if we can afford it, let's move to Oakland.
Right.
Tucson. I love Tucson. In fact, almost moved there in 2014 because we were there on tour and we were doing this book. In fact, it's in our documentary, Minimalism. But there was just the only way I can describe Tucson is it made me feel unlike any city had ever made me feel up to that point. And I had found some good people in the community, even though we were there for less than a week. Like I remember like, oh, this is a place that feels right to me. And I couldn't necessarily give you a list and compare that to other cities and say, well, here are the 10 reasons that Tucson is my favorite city. And no, it made me feel a particular way, right? And it made me want to go back there. So I've only been back there once, but since then. But I just remember leaving there with a great feeling. Salt Lake City, you and I have been there a bunch of times because it was one of the closest. I
like that city like more and more every time I go.
I think it's it's so intentionally planned, right? And when it was built up too, all the mid-century modern architecture, the way the streets are planned, they're all 660 feet. Each block is. Of course, Utah Jazz are there, so I'm a big fan. They're poised to have a really good season this year. But there's just something about Salt Lake as well that you go there and the mountains are so gorgeous. The Salt Lake itself is gorgeous right outside
people
the city.
That are awesome community.
The amazing people, great coffee shops. And there's like this interesting because the Church of Latter-day Saints is there, but then there's also like this counterculture of people who get along with those people who happen to not be Mormons. And it makes for this interesting dynamic because not everyone is the same there, but everyone tends to share similar values, even though they might have different beliefs. So Salt Lake City is a great city. Los Angeles, this is where we live right now, and I really enjoy living here. The weather is amazing. I found pockets of people who are truly amazing. It took a while to find those people because you're sifting through.
The thing about LA is you can have whatever you want. It has everything, but you have to really be clear on what you want. And then once you get clear on what you want, you have to go out and find it.
To find it.
And it's so figuring out what you want, that's hard. That's a hard task in itself. And then going out and finding those pockets of people, like that's even more difficult. But dude, I totally agree. Like once you find your peeps in LA, in like your communities, like it's one of my favorite places.
And then Dayton, Ohio. That's in my top 5 as well. And part of that has to do with the familiarity we talked about. Part of it has to do with this lack of pretense. It's a blue collar city, and there's very little pretentiousness in the city. And like I feel about Dayton the same way you felt about Missoula when you moved there. Like you were able to connect easily with the people, and I've always been able to connect easily with the people of Dayton. And some honorable mentions for me: Fargo, San Antonio, St. Petersburg, Florida, Edmonton, and San Diego. Those are all 5 cities where I don't know that I would ever live there necessarily, but I know that I would thrive in any of those 5 cities.
Yeah.
What about you, Ryan?
I've got like 2 cities, Missoula and LA.
Yeah.
Those are about the only 2 places I want to live.
There you go.
I could live in, like you said, I could live anywhere and be happy. But like my preference, I mean, so far, like Missoula and LA by far, I think are my 2 favorite cities. Yeah, I mean, talking about all these cities, I know people are like, yeah, that's great. If I could afford to go to these cities, how can I get to these cities if I'm on a tight budget? Well, let me tell you how this podcast is brought. I'm just kidding. It's not brought to you by anyone, but I am going to recommend Skyscanner. I think it's .com or maybe it's .net. I don't know. Sean will have it in the show podcast.
What
Sean
is
will put it in the
Skyscanner?
Podcast Sean will put that in the show notes. Skyscanner is basically a app or a company. It's kind of like Kayak, but what you can do is you can say, hey, I got vacation from January 1st to January 14th. And then you just pick those dates. And then you could just click an option to go anywhere in the world. And then it just starts to show you all these affordable options.
Okay.
It is, if you can use, so I have a friend who like, she just loves like the travel hacking stuff, right?
Yeah.
And she's really good at it. But if you use Skyscanner and you accompany that with like couch surfing, I mean, I've seen her go on trips to India and not spend more than $400 or $500.
Yeah.
So is it easy to like go on these long vacations super cheap? Again, no. Like nothing in life worth doing is generally easy. But you put some work into it, watch some prices, get on couch surfing, and make some friends in the community, and you can go to almost anywhere in the world and not have to spend, $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, whatever it may be. It's so funny, dude. Like when I see on The Price is Right or like Wheel of Fortune, which I haven't watched in forever, but I just remember like they would win that trip, and you just win this trip to Spain, and it's worth $8,767, and I'm like, oh my God, like I'm never gonna be able to go to Spain because I'm never gonna drop $9,000 on a trip. Like, wow, how lucky are they to win that?
Right.
But now with the technology we have and the tools we have, you can do that for a fraction of what people typically think it takes to get out of their city and to get somewhere else.
It's a non-traditional route. I mean, you talked about couch surfing. We met a whole bunch of people while we were doing our first tour who lent their houses out to couch surfers and people. We met a lot of people on couch surfing.
Yeah.
And what we realized is like, oh, there are these unconventional ways to do this that if you can't afford the traditional way, you can still explore these places. And so if you're looking for a place to move, it's not about finding the city that's perfect for you. It's about maybe testing 2, 3, or 4 or 5 of them out for committing to living there for a month or a year or the rest of your life. All right, let's move on to Right Here, Right Now, so we talk about what's going on in the lives of the minimalists. My partner, Rebecca, is starting back up her 23-day priorities reset over at minimalwellness.com. She's a registered dietitian and a nutritionist, and also extremely, extremely healthy and fit. She only takes 30 people at a time, and those tend to sell out, but the October one is coming up. So if you're interested in that, it's just minimalwellness.com. I wrote down here, send flowers. This is something we've been doing with the minimalists, Ryan. Recently, we've just had a few people reach out to us on social media. So I've had Jess send some flowers to them. Like, not everyone, you can't do this with everyone, but what I've realized is like it feels good to do this once a month where if someone had their boyfriend died or someone else, their mother died, and it's just like, hey, I'm sorry to hear about that. I see you. Here's a nice note that I'll write for them, and maybe give them a little bit of insight. Maybe I've gone through a similar experience. And what I'm going to encourage other people to do, this could even be part of the added value segment, is send flowers whenever you can. Try it out once a month. You talked about contributing to your community. That's one way you can do it. Be there for someone when they need the help. And quite often, we try to contribute when people don't need it, and then we miss out on the opportunities when someone really does need it. So sending flowers to folks is inexpensive way to show someone, look, I see you and I care. Speaking of caring, we've talked about the Gym City Market. We're over $40,000 raised for the Gym City Market right now. By the end of the year, we want to get to $100,000 to help build this grocery co-op in Dayton, Ohio. The west side of Dayton has 40% of the population and 0 grocery stores. Let's get to $100,000. If you want to help us out with that, any amount of money you can donate, $1, $20, $50, whatever you can do will help out immensely. Go to theminimalists.com/Dayton to contribute. We were in Brazil this past week.
Now it's time to talk about Brazil.
Dude, that was
such a great trip, dude. Like, I have never seen a city as big. I mean, it was like Mexico City was our connecting flight.
Right.
And like flying into there, like, oh man, Mexico City is, I mean, it just puts LA to shame. But then you get to Sao Paulo.
The density.
And it's like even more dense. What an awesome experience, man. Like, thanks so much to the folks out there at SAP who like brought us out there, and so what an awesome group of people.
We gave this keynote talk at the SAP conference. In the conference, we had this 30-second surprise, like right beforehand. Neither one, and you and I haven't talked about this yet, but right as we were getting ready to go on stage, Alex, the sound guy, he was like, by the way, only 5% of Brazilians speak English fluently. And we're getting ready to go out on stage and give a 45-minute talk, and no one bothered to tell us that 95% of the audience did not speak English fluently. Now, thankfully, what Alex said was yes, 5% of Brazilians speak English as well as he does. He said, you're probably going to see a lot of the 5% here. Right.
But they had translators, right? I'm assuming they had translators.
Right, but I didn't know that at first.
I mean, I learned Portuguese just in case.
Yeah, there were people wearing headphones so they were translating for us.
Let's talk about that real quick.
Yeah.
So the whole idea behind this conference, I don't know what you would call it.
Yeah, forum.
Yeah, forum, is they would have several talks going on at once in the same room. different stages,
20 different talks at once sometimes.
And what you did is it was a silent conference. So you wore these headphones, and then you would be like, oh, I want to hear these people talk, so I'm going to switch to channel 4, and then all of a sudden you can hear them giving their talk. Now, I'm assuming it's a little weird because you'd be listening to, stage number 3, and then at stage number 2 right next to you, like they start clapping or something, and it may be a little bit distracting, but it made me think of the silent discos that I've seen a lot in Europe, where you basically wear headphones and you can pick, between a couple different channels. And if you didn't have headphones on and you were looking into the room, there's just a bunch of people dancing
to different beats.
And looking crazy. But then as soon as you put the headphones in, you're like, oh, like now I get it.
Yeah, and you can see which people are dancing to that same beat. Yeah, and then what was fascinating is they opened up when we gave the keynote, they opened up sort of the whole conference to just our talk. So there are 20 different stages around. So people were watching there's 5,000 people there. They're watching us sort of, they'll be in this room watching our talk, or I don't know, 1,000 people in front of us are watching it there, 2,000, whatever it was. But then it's being broadcast on the other stage, and there's people watching us on a TV on the other stage as well.
That was like our biggest crowd today, right? What was it, like 5,000 people?
Yeah, having 5,000 people. I've never spoken directly to 5,000 people, just a couple thousand. And so what was really nice about Brazil is, again, going back to the people and the people we met, I mean, they could not have been friendlier. Yeah. We'll definitely make it back to Brazil to do a proper tour stop sometime in the future. But
that was wonderful.
Yeah, I finally gave myself permission to have fun at that conference, because I'm like, all right, this is gonna be like this is gonna be difficult because we're going out here. I didn't realize they didn't all speak English. Forget it. I'm just gonna have as much fun as I can on stage, and it worked.
It's so funny because we'll be given a talk, and sometimes, which this was the case in Sao Paulo, it's like we're given the talk great, the delivery's good, and like I know it's good.
Yeah, it was hitting on all cylinders.
Hitting it, but like the people aren't giving you the reactions that you're kind of looking for. But every culture is different, and also the translation barrier. Long story short, though, like it was such a wonderful event. I would do that all over again.
Absolutely, and then we had people coming up afterward, and they were like crazy happy about it. I'm like, oh, you were.
Yeah. Did you see the picture I photobombed on Instagram?
No.
Oh, dude, someone had tagged. It was when we were getting in the car, our bulletproof car that they hired.
Yeah,
for us.
They gave us a bulletproof Land Rover.
They just went out of their way
to make sure
we were safe.
Yeah.
And I could not appreciate that more. I mean, I truly am thankful for that.
It's the first time I've ever been mobbed like we were miniature versions of the Beetle, the Beatles. Like people were coming out to our bulletproof car trying to get pictures.
So you were taking that picture with the group of people outside of the car,
and
I was already in the back seat, but like I popped out and totally it's on Instagram.
I missed it.
It's pretty funny.
See it.
But yeah, just going back to the whole thing where feeling that trepidation of the city and being dangerous.
Yeah,
like I really did have this moment the other day walking. Well, it was when we came back from Sao Paulo. So yeah, just the other day walking in Hollywood, I was very nervous walking through Hollywood because, well, dude, we were walking to that concert, and like we're coming up on Cahuenga and Sunset, which is a nice area, and we cross the street, and like there's this cop who pulled these two guys over, and all of a sudden we hear gun, back up, he's got a gun, and then we look over and the dude's got their guns drawn. You've got, we started running. Me and Mariah started running towards the venue, which was really weird because we were the only ones running away. If you notice, everyone else at that time was going towards the chaos, which blows my mind.
That's back to the acting versus reacting. I was acting. I want to get out of here. Other people were like, wait, what's going on around here?
Let's see. Why do these cops got their guns out?
Can I get a selfie with this person who's getting into a fight with the cops?
Within 3 minutes, there's a helicopter swarming above the scene. There are like at least you can see half a dozen here, another dozen cops. I mean, this is reason to give me a little bit of trepidation walking around Hollywood. But what I realized the other day, especially coming from Sao Paulo, is that if I keep to myself, if I avoid, the dangerous areas as much as I can, and just really be smart when it comes to when I walk around, where I walk around, and so forth and so on, chances are I'm probably going to be okay.
Yeah.
And that I don't know, man. I don't know why this is such a huge breakthrough for me, but like I was just explaining this to Mariah yesterday when we were walking to get some groceries or something, and I was just explaining to her, like, probably our lives are not going to be in danger as long as we are smart, as long as we are, deliberate. And it's Sao Paulo really helped me see that, because it's a dangerous city, and if you go to the wrong place at the wrong time, if you're not keeping your wits about you, like, that city is not a city for beginners.
Yeah. But of course the same can be true in virtually any city you go to, right?
Exactly.
You're going to find the wrong people. If you're looking for the wrong people or not looking out for the wrong people, then you can end up in a world of hurt, whether you're in Orlando or Brooklyn or Dayton or Missoula or wherever. Like, you can end up in the wrong place, and if you're not doing it intentionally, then you can be in for a world of hurt. A couple new writings on our website. We have the 1 in, 10 out rule. I won't explain that to you, but you'll figure it out. It's up on our website right now. And also the rule of 2. The rule of 2. It's a new essay up on the website. You can find those over at theminimalists.com. And also, if you want to get new essays, new minimalism rules, new podcast show notes as well, you can sign up for our email list over at theminimalists.com. We'll never send you any spam, because if you wanted spam, you'd probably go buy it yourself. I've had a few people ask about this, so I figured I'd at least talk about it real quick on the podcast. While you're waiting patiently for our second film to come out, you can watch 6 hours of bonus footage from our documentary Minimalism. A lot of you have already seen it, but those 6 hours of bonus footage are available only at minimalismfilm.com. I think it's $10 if you want to buy the 6 hours of bonus interviews. It's basically all the interviews that we had in the documentary, but extended versions of them.
Some of them didn't even not even appeared in the documentary, but some really awesome interviews.
Right, it didn't fit into the narrative documentary, but they're good standalone interviews. Andy Davis is one that sticks out. There are quite a few people. Drew, who did the soundtrack to the film. So there's 6 hours of additional footage, bonus interviews, you can get over at minimalismfilm.com. And what else do I have here? Oh, if you want to comment on this episode, you can do so over at YouTube. youtube.com/theminimalists.
And we'll just remind you, like, we ban people pretty freely, so if you don't want to be in our house, you don't have to.
It's a safe space for you to comment too. If you're just a good commenter, then that's a great place to go. Right, have a conversation.
Absolutely.
All right, Ryan, you got anything else for us?
Yeah, man, I got some voicemail tips and tricks from our listeners. You want to check them out?
Let's do it.
All right.
Hey Ryan and Josh, my name is Suzanne and I'm from Munich, Germany, and I have a tip for all the fashionistas who want to have a minimalist but regularly updated wardrobe. My friends and I have been doing clothing swap parties a couple of times now. We meet up at one of our places and everyone brings clothes she or he does not like or wear anymore. We display the items like in a shop, create a small changing room, and then everyone tries on and takes home whatever he or she likes. That way you do not spend any money, get rid of old items, and give them a new home where they can add more value. And you also get new clothes for free. Plus you can try them on first and can be 100% sure they will fit and look good.
Hi, Josh and Ryan. This is Desmond from Las Vegas. I am calling in with a tip for your listeners. If they are anything like me, some may be obsessed with clearing the notifications or having a zero inbox. This includes the tiny red circle that pops up on the iPhone apps in the top left corner with the number of unread messages. After constantly deleting and reinstalling my work apps to eliminate my distractions, I happened to go into my settings, which is where I found a solution. In settings, once you have clicked on the app, go to the notifications. In the middle of the screen, you will see a switch that says badge app icon. Once you turn it off, those little annoying circles are gone and the numbers are gone with them. And you can use your phone with one less distraction.
Hello, Joshua and Ryan. My name is Alona from Melbourne, Australia. So I have a tip for parents who struggle to deal with toys for their kids. In Australia, we have toy libraries where you can borrow toys like books in the usual libraries. There is a small annual fee that lets you borrow a few toys for your children every week or so, and there is a lot of toys to choose from. I believe something similar exists in the US and other countries, so it might be worth looking into in your area. That can save parents a lot of money and storage space, as well as letting a child to learn the life of access instead of excess.
All right, y'all, that's it for this episode. If you have a question for the Minimalists, give us a call, 406-219-7839. You can also email a voice memo to podcast@theminimalists.com. Oh, and before we tell you all to leave here, Ryan, I want before we give you the last line, our friend Austin Hartley Leonard has one of my favorite songs. And I like to play it anytime I go back to Dayton or anytime I go back to Ohio. So I figured, Sean, if we can end this episode, if you listen to the audio version of it, you'll get to hear Ohio by our friend Austin Hartley Leonard. It is one of my top 5 favorite songs of all time. Yeah. We just got to hang out with him in Nashville recently. But it's a great song. We'll end the podcast with that. And if you're watching on YouTube, then we'll just put I don't know, maybe there's a link or something, Jordan, you can find, because we can't play other people's music that we don't own on YouTube. All right, y'all, if y'all leave here today with just one message, we hope it's this. Love people and use things, because the opposite never works. Thanks for listening, y'all.
We'll see you next time.
The Minimalists.